It would have been nice to have, now I wish I had wanted to be a writer, but I didn't then.
Angie Dickinson has lived long enough to see Hollywood change, but also long enough to know how much has stubbornly stayed the same. Now in her 90s, she sits in a quiet studio, surrounded by photographs that span her life. Movie sets, premieres, red carpets, and private moments once hidden from the public eye. As she flips through them, her voice carries the weight of both triumph and hurt. She admits she rarely uses the word hate. It feels too heavy, too consuming for someone who has survived so much and still carries herself with grace. But there were moments, she concedes, when certain men left bruises on her heart, her career, her dignity. Publicists who pushed her out of the frame. Producers who demanded her body more than her craft. A husband whose affection felt more like neglect. And an entire culture that saw her first as a sex symbol and only later as an actress of real depth. "I loved it," she once said of life alongside fame, "until they pushed me aside. And then I didn't like it." Tonight, she promises to be candid, to name the men and forces that tested her, and to reflect on what she truly hated most. Number 6. The publicists who pushed her aside.
Okay, send her in like you did with hundreds of others.
The Oscars of 1974 were supposed to be one of those golden nights. Bright lights, glamorous gowns, and a sense that simply being in the room meant you were part of Hollywood's inner circle. Angie Dickinson arrived with her husband, Burt Bacharach, whose career as a composer had reached dazzling heights. The cameras, the reporters, the whispers of recognition, it was intoxicating until the tide shifted. As Dickinson recalled years later, she was enjoying the glow until suddenly, they pushed me aside. The publicists and photographers swarmed Bacharach, and in the chaos of flashbulbs and shouted questions, Angie, herself an accomplished actress, was treated as background. The frame was his, not theirs. In that moment, she wasn't Angie Dickinson, star of Rio Bravo and soon-to-be policewoman. She was the wife, the accessory. The humiliation cut deeper than bruised ego. It was a reminder of how quickly a woman's identity could be erased when standing next to a famous man. Hollywood's publicity machines weren't built to honor partnerships. They were built to magnify the brightest star, and more often than not, that meant the man. Dickinson, who had carved her own path in a fiercely competitive industry, found herself literally pushed out of the picture. The irony is sharp. She didn't resent Bacharach's fame. She admitted she loved it at first. What she despised was the machinery that turned her into a prop. For an actress who had fought to be seen on her own terms, the feeling of being shoved aside, of watching her identity dissolve in the frenzy, was a sting she never forgot. That moment at the Oscars wasn't just about one night. It symbolized a broader pattern. Women in Hollywood were too often measured by the men beside them. Their worth was tallied not in roles or performances, but in who they accompanied down the carpet. Dickinson's story at the 1974 Oscars is hauntingly familiar even today, when red carpet interviews still ask women who they're wearing before asking what they've achieved. Her resentment toward those publicists was less about their individual behavior than about what they represented. A system that diminished her in plain sight. And it forces us to ask, why do we still so often measure a woman's worth by her husband's success rather than her own? Number 5. TV producers who exploited her on Policewoman.
A detective agency, because I found I couldn't stay married to my...
When Angie Dickinson signed on to star in Policewoman in 1974, it was a groundbreaking moment. She became the first woman to headline a network crime drama, playing Sergeant Pepper Anderson, a tough undercover cop navigating the same dangers as her male counterparts. On the surface, it looked like progress. But behind the scenes, Dickinson often felt reduced to something less than the trailblazing lead she was hired to be. At a panel decades later, she revealed the part that still made her wince. "I had to do shower scenes all the time. I felt exploited." Week after week, the producers insisted on working her sexuality into the storylines, reminding her that audiences needed glamour as much as grit. One scene in particular lingers in her memory, stepping into the water of a set shower, the male crew waiting outside, the camera lingering too long on her body. The suggestion was clear. Her toughness needed to be softened, palatable, always counterbalanced by titillation. This constant negotiation between strength and sex appeal frustrated her. She admitted that producers deliberately walked a tightrope with her character. If we went too hard and made her too tough, people weren't gonna like that. I wasn't Marilyn Monroe, but I was middle of the road and it worked. Those words reveal the double bind she faced. She had to be tough enough to be credible, but not so tough as to threaten male audiences. Attractive enough to please, but never allowed to shed the lens of desirability. The problem wasn't only the shower scenes, it was what they represented. Here was a woman blazing a trail on television, showing millions that female leads could anchor primetime dramas. Yet the system still framed her through the male gaze, commodifying her appeal rather than celebrating her authority.
And her name is Angie Dickinson, as if you didn't know.
How nice of you to say that.
Instead of allowing Dickinson's talent to stand on its own, producers hedged their bets by making her character sexy, vulnerable, and therefore safe. And yet, despite this constant undermining, Dickinson delivered. She infused Sergeant Anderson with empathy and determination, turning what could have been a shallow stereotype into a character audiences admired. She endured the exploitation, but never allowed it to fully define her. Looking back, the question is impossible to avoid. How many shower scenes does it take to make a hit TV show? And at what point does entertainment cross the line into exploitation? Number 4. Burt Bacharach, the husband who didn't respect her.
I don't live with him anymore.
Someone else
But
has
I-
taken his place?
That I wouldn't answer because I don't want him to know.
Angie Dickinson's marriage to Burt Bacharach looked glamorous from the outside. She was a Hollywood star. He was one of the most celebrated composers of his time, and together they were the kind of couple gossip columns adored. But the truth behind the photographs and red carpets was far less dazzling. In the quiet of their home in the 1970s, Angie sometimes hoped for intimacy, for a moment where her husband's music would be not just a career, but a gift he shared with her. She once described sitting by the piano, listening to him play, waiting for a tender exchange. Instead, the phone would ring and Bacharach would excuse himself to speak with a collaborator. The music that filled the room was never for her. It was for his work, his world. Angie was left in the margins, feeling invisible. Her reflections years later cut to the bone. He never loved me. He never had respect for me. He loved me his own way, which was not too good. Coming from a woman known for her candor, the words are devastating. For all the glamour and affection projected onto their relationship, Dickinson felt it was hollow. She believed in the marriage, but what she offered, love, loyalty, presence, was never fully returned. Their relationship was also strained by infidelity. Bacharach's affairs were no secret, and Dickinson, despite her own fame, bore the humiliation quietly for years. By 1981, the marriage was over. The divorce wasn't just a personal heartbreak, it was a sobering reminder that even someone as admired as Angie Dickinson could be treated as secondary in her own home. What makes this chapter of her story especially poignant is that it mirrors the professional struggles she faced in Hollywood. Just as producers diminished her by focusing on her body rather than her talent, her husband diminished her by withholding respect and affection. In both arenas, public and private, she was forced to reckon with men who saw her less than she deserved. And so we're left with a troubling thought. Can a marriage survive when one partner offers love and the other withholds respect? Or is respect, more than love itself, the foundation that determines whether a relationship can endure? Number 3, men who saw only a sex symbol.
Equally or even more so. Like Marilyn Monroe, she was known as the greatest, and rightly so, sex symbol of all time. Boy, try to do Shakespeare after that.
By the mid-1960s, Angie Dickinson had already proven she could carry films opposite Hollywood's biggest names. From Rio Bravo alongside John Wayne to Ocean's 11 with the Rat Pack, she had the charisma and the skill to stand toe-to-toe with male legends. But for many of the men who ran studios and greenlit roles, she wasn't first and foremost an actress. She was a commodity, a body to dress up and sell. She recalled how male producers often demanded she lean harder into her looks. On one project, she was asked to shorten her skirt, tilt her hips, and flirt more overtly with the camera. The instructions weren't about character or storytelling. They were about keeping her appealing to a male audience. Dickinson longed to dive into complex, meaty roles, but time and again she was boxed into the role of the alluring woman. Her own words capture the frustration. "I wouldn't want to be known only as a sex symbol. I wanted to be known as an actress equally or even more so." That statement, blunt and honest, reflects the conflict that defined much of her career. Yes, she had the glamour, but she wanted the craft. She could turn heads, but she wanted to move hearts. This tension was hardly unique to Dickinson. The 1960s were filled with actresses whose talent was overshadowed by how they looked in a dress or how their names played in publicity copy. But Dickinson spoke openly about the pressure, admitting she resented those who reduced her work to her beauty. She wasn't naive, she knew her looks helped her career, but she wanted to be judged on her range, not just her appearance.
And he would be funny doing and saying nothing. He just had that lightness about him.
It's telling that many of her strongest performances came when she was given space to break free of the sex symbol mold. In Point Blank, 1967, for instance, she channeled icy determination and vulnerability in a role that showcased her dramatic instincts. Audiences could see she had the chops, but too often, industry gatekeepers refused to acknowledge what was right in front of them. The real injury wasn't the costumes or the camera angles. It was the condescension, the implication that she wasn't capable of more. For a woman who worked tirelessly to establish herself in a male-dominated business, being reduced to a symbol was one of the deepest cuts. And it makes us ask, why does society still struggle to see past the surface of a beautiful woman? Why do we so often let appearances obscure the deeper truth of talent and artistry? Number 2. The double standard crowd.
An oil tanker.
Yeah.
You know, or something.
Yeah, something.
Oh, they're always doing something like that.
Oh, I know.
You have to have a little excitement for rolling.
Well, just this thing keeps...
If Angie Dickinson's life in Hollywood taught her anything, it was that the rules for men and women were never the same. She could be celebrated for her beauty, admired for her roles, even envied for the company she kept. But when it came to personal freedom, the standards shifted dramatically. On one talk show appearance, Dickinson was asked a question about her romantic life. She smiled, leaned back, and delivered an answer that crackled with both wit and defiance. "The double standard means men can run around and women cannot. I think I'm up to testing that." The line drew laughter, but beneath the humor was a challenge, a refusal to accept the hypocrisy she had lived under for decades. Her career and personal life had been shaped by this imbalance. Men in Hollywood could flaunt their affairs, juggle partners, and still be admired. For women, even whispers of impropriety could damage reputations, close doors, or reduce them to gossip fodder. Dickinson knew this firsthand. As someone linked romantically to high-profile men, from Frank Sinatra to presidents, she saw how rumors about her personal life were weaponized in ways they never were for men. The irony, of course, is that these double standards weren't limited to her private life. They showed up on set too. Male actors could play ruthless, aggressive roles and be praised for their toughness. But when Dickinson tried to play a character with the same edge, producers pulled her back, reminding her not to be too tough, because audiences wouldn't accept it. Even her groundbreaking work on Policewoman was framed by these limits. What stands out in her remark isn't just the sarcasm, but the courage. At a time when women in Hollywood often avoided speaking openly about inequality, Dickinson dared to put the hypocrisy on blast. It wasn't a lecture. It was a sly joke that landed like a truth bomb.
Pays to get through high school to get a scholarship to go to college. And it would have been nice to have, now I wish I had wanted to be a writer, but I didn't then. And
her words resonate even more now, decades later, in an era still reckoning with double standards that haven't fully disappeared. She made clear that what she hated wasn't simply the individual men who judged her, but the entire cultural script they operated by. And it makes you wonder, if men and women had been held to the same standard all along, how many careers and how many lives would have turned out differently? Number 1. Disrespect, the ultimate villain.
Well, it seemed kind of nice to bring out a thing. I'm fine.
Well, don't you look stunning tonight?
I hope so.
Yeah. You know each other well, don't you?
Oh, yes.
For Angie Dickinson, the men who wounded her heart or limited her career were not just individuals. They were symptoms of something larger. When she sat in that studio decades later, reflecting on her life, she made clear that what she truly despised wasn't one man's betrayal or another's cruelty. It was the pattern. The thread that tied together the publicists who shoved her out of the frame, the producers who exploited her body, the husband who withheld respect, the men who dismissed her as a sex symbol, and the crowd who enforced the double standard. That thread was disrespect. In the closing montage of her imagined reckoning, the older Angie lays the photographs on the table. The glossy shots from premieres, the candid stills from sets, the personal moments with men who once loomed large. One by one, she looks at them with a mixture of tenderness and pain. Then, in a quiet act of defiance, she burns the list. She is not interested in keeping score. Her hatred is not for people, but for the systemic contempt that shadowed her career. Though so often labeled a sex symbol, Dickinson pushed back against the reduction. "I wouldn't want to be known only as a sex symbol. I wanted to be known as an actress," she declared. That insistence reframes her entire career, not as the story of a woman defined by men, but of a woman determined to define herself.
I'm doing a show down the hall. They're bringing back, it's a great American tradition. They've asked me to host it, and I'm very excited. Can I?
The real villain in her story isn't Burt Bacharach or a handful of producers. It's the industry culture that told her to smile while diminishing her, to bare skin while hiding her strength, to accept a supporting role in her own life when she had earned center stage. Naming disrespect as the ultimate antagonist is Dickinson's way of shifting the conversation. Hatred for her becomes not bitterness, but fuel for change. And it leaves us with the central question. If disrespect was the greatest enemy of her generation, how much of it still lingers in ours? And what will it take to finally put it to rest? The studio falls silent as Angie Dickinson sets the last photograph aside. Her voice softens, but the clarity remains. For a woman whose career spanned decades, whose beauty was celebrated, and whose talent often overlooked, she has earned the right to choose her own ending. She admits that holding on to hate is heavy, a burden that drags you down. What she chooses instead is something lighter, more enduring: respect. Throughout her career, Dickinson endured slights that could have broken anyone. She was pushed out of frames at the height of her fame, exploited in scenes meant to titillate rather than empower, diminished in a marriage that lacked reciprocity, and reduced to a symbol rather than recognized as an artist. Again and again, she faced men and institutions that sought to contain her. And yet, she never stopped showing up. She never stopped working. She never stopped carving out a place for herself. By naming disrespect as the ultimate villain, Dickinson reframes her story. The list of men she hated was never really about grudges. It was about exposing the culture that undervalued women, forcing them to walk a tightrope between desire and dismissal. Her honesty, even in her 90s, reminds us that bitterness is not the only legacy of pain. Resilience can be the final word. As the lights dim and Angie walks away, her parting thought lingers. "In the end, I choose love and respect." It's a line not about surrender, but about triumph. And it leaves us with a question worth sitting with. When history looks back at us, will it see a culture that learned to value women fully, or just another chapter in the long shadow of disrespect?